The letter is 3 pages long, and Denise Marshall will read it 11 times before she calls anyone. It arrives on a Tuesday in March, tucked between a hospital billing circular and a coupon flyer, and for a moment she almost throws it away with the rest of the mail without looking twice. Then she sees the return address, a state correctional facility 200 miles north, and her hands go still on the kitchen counter. She has received letters from that address before. 6 years of them, arriving on no particular schedule, always opened alone, always read standing up, as if sitting down would mean she'd agreed to stay a while with whatever they said. This one is different before she even opens it. This one asks for something. Marcus Webb is not asking for parole anymore. He already has that, 3 years now, a work release program, a room above a hardware store that isn't a cell, a job stocking shelves that lets him walk to it and back without an escort. What he's asking Denise Marshall for, in handwriting she now knows better than her late father's, is her voice. A formal statement, submitted to the board, supporting his full and unconditional release. Not supervised. Not monitored. Free, the way people were free before any of this happened, the way Emily was free the last morning Denise ever saw her alive. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why a woman who once stood in a courtroom and forgave the man who killed her daughter would consider, even for a moment, saying no to him now, and what that no, or that yes, would actually cost her. Because forgiveness, it turns out, was never the hard part. The hard part is what people expect you to keep doing with it afterward. She reads the letter standing at the counter, coffee forgotten beside her hand, the steam gone from it before she finishes the first page. She reads it again sitting down, because her knees have made the decision for her. By the third reading, she has stopped absorbing the words and started studying his handwriting instead, steadier than it used to be, less cramped, the letters of a man who has had a great deal of time to practice being careful. By the 11th reading, late that night, alone at her kitchen table with the overhead light buzzing faintly the way it always has, she isn't reading the letter at all anymore. She's reading herself, trying to locate the exact shape of what she's feeling, and coming up only with the sense that something she thought was finished has just discovered it wasn't. 6 years is enough time to build a life that looks, from the outside, like healing. Denise's kitchen is small and tidy in the way of someone who has decided that order is a kind of prayer. Morning light comes in low and yellow across a corkboard by the refrigerator, and pinned in its center, slightly curled at the corners now, is a photograph of a young woman laughing at something outside the frame, brown hair catching the sun, a small silver necklace at her throat. Emily. 22 forever, because that's how old she was on the night that ended everything else about who Denise used to be. Denise works in the billing department at Millbrook General, 3 days a week now instead of 5, because the doctor said her blood pressure needed the other 2. She is 54. Her hair has gone the color of ash at the temples and she wears it pulled back, out of the way, practical. There is a small scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident years before any of this, the kind of scar nobody asks about because it isn't the interesting one. The interesting scars, the ones people want to ask about, don't show. At the hospital, her co-workers know her as steady, unshakable, the woman who never seems rattled by the families who come to her window furious about a bill they can't pay, grieving a diagnosis they didn't expect. She has a gift for sitting across from someone else's worst week and staying calm inside it. What none of them know is where that particular calm was forged, or what it costs her some mornings just to put it on along with her lanyard. She has a cardigan she has worn to 3 television interviews and 1 magazine profile, because somewhere along the way it became load-bearing, the thing people expected to see when they pictured the woman who forgave her daughter's killer on television, live, 6 years ago, her voice not breaking once. People still recognize her sometimes, in the grocery store, at church. They say things like you're an inspiration and I don't know how you did it, and she says thank you, and she means it, mostly, and she goes home and stands in her kitchen and doesn't tell anyone that some nights she isn't sure the woman on television and the woman standing at this counter are entirely the same person. She keeps Emily's necklace in a small dish by the sink. Some mornings she puts it on, unthinking, the way another woman might put on a watch. Today, holding the letter for the 12th time, she doesn't notice she's already reaching for it, the small silver chain cool against her collarbone before she's aware her hand has moved. Her ex-husband Robert calls it her forgiveness face, the specific stillness she gets when something about Marcus Webb enters a room. Robert would know. He was there for the whole of it, right up until the divorce 2 years later, which everyone assumed was about grief and was really about the different shapes grief took in each of them. He grew louder in his mourning, she grew quieter. He still wears his wedding ring, though the marriage ended 4 years ago. Nobody has ever asked him why, least of all Denise, who suspects she already knows and has decided it isn't hers to comment on anymore. She goes to work the next morning anyway, because routine is the one thing she still trusts completely. At her window in the billing department, a woman half her age sits across from her in tears over a bill she can't pay for her son's emergency surgery, and Denise does what she always does, walks her through the hospital's assistance program, line by line, patient and unhurried, her voice never once betraying that she spent the previous night reading and rereading a letter from the man who killed her daughter. A coworker, passing behind her afterward, remarks that Denise has a gift for staying calm when everyone around her is falling apart. Denise says thank you and doesn't correct her. She has learned, over 6 years, that people mistake her stillness for peace, when most days it's simply the only shape she's found for carrying something too large to set down in front of them. She doesn't call Robert first. She doesn't call Pastor James first either, though she will, eventually, sit in his cluttered office and try to explain what she can't yet explain to herself. First she calls no one. She reads the letter a 4th time, a 5th, standing at the counter with her coffee going cold, and what strikes her hardest isn't the request itself. It's how carefully Marcus has avoided demanding anything. I'm not asking you to say yes, he's written, in the plain, deliberate hand of a man who learned young not to expect to be believed. I'm asking you to hear the whole of what I'm asking before you decide anything. I know what I already took means I don't have the right to ask you for anything else. I'm asking anyway. That's on me, not you. She sets the letter down. Picks it back up. There's a particular kind of vertigo in being asked, again, by the person who ended your daughter's life, to give him something. The first time, at least, the ask had been implicit, mercy, in the abstract, the kind a courtroom half expects a grieving mother to perform under the weight of cameras and a watching public. This time it's specific. A signature. A statement. Her name, publicly, attached to his freedom, in black and white, permanent in a way the first forgiveness, spoken, emotional, delivered once and allowed to recede into memory, never quite was. 3 days later, before she has said a word to anyone, her attorney friend from church mentions, gently, over coffee at a diner 2 towns over where Denise thought no one would recognize her, that Marcus's lawyer has been trying to reach her, through the church, through the hospital, through anyone who might have a working number. Denise sets her fork down and doesn't finish her eggs. 2 days after that, a reporter from the regional paper who covered the original hearing 6 years ago leaves a voicemail asking, in the too friendly tone reporters use when they already sense a story forming, whether it's true that Denise Marshall has reconsidered her position on Marcus Webb. She listens to the message twice, standing in her driveway with her car keys still in her hand, and feels something close to panic for the first time since the letter arrived, not because the question is wrong, but because she doesn't have an answer, and she can already hear, in the reporter's voice, how little that will matter once the story starts moving without her. She hasn't reconsidered anything. She hasn't decided a single thing. But somehow the world already believes there's a decision to leak, and Denise stands in her kitchen with the phone in her hand, feeling something she recognizes from 6 years ago and hoped never to feel again, the sensation of a private and enormous choice being pulled, inch by inch, out of her hands and into the light before she's ready to hold it up herself, in her own time, on her own terms. She doesn't call the reporter back. She calls Pastor James instead, and asks if she can come by his office. Not today. Tomorrow, when she's had time to think about what she actually wants to say, rather than what would sound good said out loud to a man with a notepad. That night she doesn't sleep well. She lies in the dark going over the same 6 words the reporter used, reconsidered her position on Marcus Webb, as if repetition might reveal what her position actually is. Somewhere around 2 in the morning she gets up, pads into the kitchen in bare feet, and takes Emily's photograph down from the corkboard just to hold it, the way she used to when Emily was small enough to be held instead of only remembered. 6 years ago, Denise stood at a podium in a parole board hearing room with fluorescent light flattening every color in it to gray, and read a statement she had written and rewritten 11 times, the same number, though she doesn't consciously notice the echo, as the number of times she'll read Marcus's letter now. "I forgive Marcus Webb," she said then, her voice even, measured, the voice Robert still calls her forgiveness face when it shows up on her instead of just in her mouth. "Not because what he did deserves forgiving. Nothing does. I forgive him because I have decided that my daughter's death will not also take the rest of my life from me." It made the local news, and then the wider news, and then, for a strange 6 weeks, it made her a minor public figure, invited to speak at churches 2 states away, quoted in a magazine piece about restorative justice, held up, gently but unmistakably, as proof of something. That grace was possible. That the worst thing that can happen to a mother doesn't have to be the last thing that defines her. Strangers wrote her letters. A woman in Ohio said Denise's statement had talked her out of a decades-long grudge against her own brother. A pastor in Tennessee asked if she'd consider coming to preach, just once, as a guest, though Denise had never in her life stood behind a pulpit and told him so. What almost none of those audiences knew, what Denise has never told anyone, not Robert, not Pastor James, not the reporters who called her an inspiration, is that she wrote that statement the way she'd write a eulogy, carefully, beautifully, and slightly apart from what she actually felt in the moment she was feeling it. She meant every word. She also, if she is honest with herself in the specific and merciless way she tries to be at 3 in the morning, cannot fully separate how much of that forgiveness was for Emily, for herself, for God, and how much of it was for the room. For the cameras rolling at the back. For the version of herself she needed everyone, including her, to believe was real, because the alternative, a mother too broken to be gracious, felt, at the time, like one more thing Marcus Webb would have taken from her. That's the secret she carries into Pastor James's church office the next afternoon, into the worn armchair across from his cluttered desk where, for 6 years now, she has come to say the things she says nowhere else. The office smells the way it always has, of old paper and coffee and the candle he keeps lit on his bookshelf for no reason he's ever explained. It's the only place, she realizes, sitting down, where she doesn't feel the need to arrange her face first. He's asking for more this time, she tells him. Not parole. Full release. He wants me to stand up again and say it again. Pastor James is 60, white-haired, with the kind of unhurried patience that used to frustrate her and now she understands as its own form of mercy. He takes off his glasses, cleans them on his shirt, a habit she suspects is less about the lenses than about giving himself a beat before he speaks. "What are you afraid he's really asking for?" he says. "I told you. His release. That's what the letter asks for." He puts his glasses back on, the wire rims catching the lamplight. "I asked what you're afraid of." She doesn't answer that day. She isn't ready. She sits with the question a while longer, watching dust move in the light from his window, and eventually talks about something else entirely, a difficult patient's family at the hospital, a leak under her sink, the way people do when the real conversation has gotten too heavy to hold for one sitting. Pastor James lets her. He always does. But the question follows her home, and it's still there 3 nights later when Robert shows up at her door unannounced, having heard, from the same reporter, it turns out, who called Denise fishing for a comment and got one from her ex-husband instead, off the record, angrier than he meant to be.
"Tell me you're not actually considering this,"
Robert says, standing on her porch in his work jacket, jaw tight in the particular way she learned, over 18 years of marriage, meant he was one sentence from either shouting or leaving. "I haven't decided anything, Robert. That's not what I asked." She lets him in, because 6 years of separate grief has taught her that turning him away only makes the anger sharper the next time it finds her. He stands in her kitchen, his kitchen, once, back when there was still a once to reference, and doesn't sit down. His eyes go, briefly, to the corkboard, to Emily's photograph, and something in his face tightens further, as if the sight of their daughter has reminded him exactly why he's here. "She's my daughter too." "Then act like it." The words land exactly where he means them to, and for a moment neither of them says anything, the old grief and the old anger occupying the room like a third person neither of them can look at directly. Denise feels the old fault line between them open again, the one that never fully closed, the one where his rage and her stillness used to meet and grind against each other in the year after Emily died, until it wore them both down into two separate people living in two separate houses. "I never told you what it was like," she says, quietly, "to give that statement 6 years ago. What it cost me. You watched it on the news like everyone else." "I was in the room, Denise." "You were in the room. You weren't inside it." She isn't accusing him, not exactly, her voice stays level, the forgiveness face holding even now, but something underneath it has shifted, an honesty she hasn't offered him in years. "I don't expect you to understand why I even have to think about this. I'm not sure I understand it myself. But I need you to let me think about it without deciding, for me, what kind of mother I'm allowed to be while I do." Robert doesn't answer that directly. He looks at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that isn't quite anger anymore, and when he finally speaks his voice has lost some of its edge, replaced by something closer to exhaustion. "I just don't want to lose the last version of her we've got left," he says. "The one where what happened to her still means something." "It will always mean something, Robert. That's not what's being decided here." When Robert leaves, he doesn't slam the door. He never does. He just closes it, quietly, the way a man closes a door on something he has decided he can't fix tonight. Denise stands alone in her kitchen for a long time afterward, Emily's necklace cool in her palm, and asks herself the question Pastor James asked her, the one she still hasn't answered. What am I actually afraid of? She turns the question over for days, in the quiet hours before work, in the longer quiet hours after it, until one evening, scrubbing a pan that doesn't need scrubbing, the answer arrives whole and unbidden, the way true answers sometimes do. She isn't afraid that Marcus doesn't deserve freedom. She isn't even afraid, entirely, of what Robert or the church or the reporters will think of her either way. What she's afraid of, she realizes, standing at her sink with soap going cold on her hands, is that if she says yes again, she'll never get to stop being the woman who forgave him. That the 6 years she spent quietly, privately rebuilding a self that wasn't only a headline will collapse back into the one moment everyone already knows her for, forever, on repeat, every time his name comes up in a hearing room for the rest of both their lives. She doesn't tell Robert that. She doesn't tell Pastor James that either, not yet. She writes it down instead, on a scrap of paper she folds and tucks into the same drawer where she keeps Marcus's letters, as if putting it in writing might make it easier to look at later, when she's ready. Here's where it gets complicated in a way none of them, not Denise, not Robert, not even Marcus's own lawyer, fully anticipated. 2 weeks into her silence, still undecided, still fielding calls she doesn't return, Denise agrees, against every instinct that has kept her steady for 6 years, to read the full case file his attorney has sent, not the request itself, which she has memorized by now against her will, but the record behind it. Program logs. Disciplinary reports, all clean for the last 5 years. Letters of reference, not written to her but written about him, by people she's never met, people who have no idea their words will end up on her kitchen table on a Thursday night with the dishes unwashed in the sink behind her. For the last 4 years, Marcus Webb has been mentoring at-risk teenagers through a prison outreach program, boys the same age he was when he took Emily's life, boys standing at the same fork in the road he stood at, before he chose wrong. There are letters. A boy named Darnell, 17, writing in a school assignment about the man who talked him out of getting into a car with people who were about to do something he couldn't undo, a decision that would have ended, Darnell writes, with him either dead or exactly where Marcus is now. A program coordinator's note describing Marcus as one of the few volunteers the boys don't perform for, because he doesn't perform for them either. He tells them the truth about that night, she writes. Not to scare them. Because they can tell the difference between a man selling them a lesson and a man who's actually still living inside his own worst mistake. He isn't asking for freedom to escape what he did. He's asking for freedom to keep doing, outside a fence, what he's already been doing inside one for years. It doesn't undo anything. Denise sits with the file in her lap for a long time before she lets herself feel what's rising in her chest, because she recognizes it immediately as dangerous, not fear this time, and not anger, but something worse. Sympathy. The kind of sympathy that has nowhere safe to go, because the boy Marcus is trying to save other boys from becoming as exactly the boy who killed her daughter, and no amount of mentoring reaches backward far enough to touch that night, no matter how many Darnells it might reach forward. She reads Darnell's essay 3 times. On the third reading, she finds herself crying in a way she hasn't in years, not for Emily, not exactly, but for the strange, unbearable fact that a boy she's never met might be alive tonight because Marcus Webb learned, too late for her daughter, exactly what it looks like to talk someone out of the worst night of their life. 2 days later, without telling anyone, she calls the number listed for the program coordinator, a woman named Sylvia who sounds startled and then quietly moved to hear Denise's voice on the line. They talk for 20 minutes. Sylvia doesn't ask Denise to forgive anyone, doesn't ask her for anything at all, she simply answers the questions Denise puts to her, plainly, without embellishment. Yes, Marcus is the real thing, as far as 6 years of working alongside him has shown her. No, she can't promise Denise what he'll do with freedom if he gets it, because nobody can promise that about anyone. I can only tell you what I've watched him do with a cell, Sylvia says. The rest is his to prove, same as it would be for any of us. When Denise hangs up, she sits at her kitchen table for a long time with the phone still warm in her hand, aware that she has just done something she didn't tell Robert, didn't tell Pastor James, didn't plan to do at all until she was already dialing. She went looking for reasons to say yes. And she isn't sure yet whether that frightens her or steadies her, only that it's true, and that it changes the shape of the decision in front of her in a way she isn't ready to name out loud. She calls Pastor James again, and this time she doesn't wait for the armchair. He's not the same person, she says, before she's even sat down, the file still in her bag, her eyes still faintly red. Or he says he isn't. And I think, God help me, James, I think I believe him. Does that change what you owe him? That's exactly the question. I don't know if it changes anything, or if it's just making it harder to say no. Pastor James is quiet for a moment, and when he speaks again his voice has a different weight to it, something he's clearly been carrying toward this conversation for longer than she realized. Denise. I need to tell you something I should have told you 6 years ago, before that first hearing. He looks older, suddenly, in the lamplight of his office, his hands folded in a way that looks almost like penance. I encouraged you toward that first statement before I was sure you were ready to give it. I believed it would be good for you, good for the congregation, good as a testimony, good for what our church would come to mean to people who heard your story. I don't know anymore how much of that was for you and how much was for what I wanted your story to mean to other people. I've carried that for 6 years and never said it out loud, not even to myself in those exact words. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. Whatever you decide about Marcus, I need it to be yours. Not mine. Not the church's. Not even, necessarily, what you think God wants. Figure that part out for yourself, in your own time, without me handing you the answer the way I did the first time. It's the first time in 6 years he's told her something that sounds less like guidance and more like confession, and it unsettles her more than she expects, not because it changes what she thinks of him, but because it means, for the first time since the letter arrived, that no one in her life is going to tell her what the right answer is. Not Robert, who's certain and furious. Not James, who's finally, deliberately, stepping back. Just her, and the boy her daughter's killer used to be, and the man he says he's become, and 6 years of a peace she's no longer sure was ever entirely true. She decides, 3 weeks after the letter, that she has to see him. Not the file. Not the letters. Him. She hasn't stood in a room with Marcus Webb since the trial, has spoken to him only through paper for 6 years, and some part of her has understood, without admitting it, that a decision made entirely through letters would be another kind of performance, clean, controlled, safe from whatever his actual face might do to her resolve. She doesn't tell Robert she's going. She doesn't tell Pastor James either, not this time. She drives the 2 hours north alone, radio off, Emily's necklace against her collarbone, going over and over what she might say and arriving, each time, at nothing. The visiting room is exactly what she pictured and somehow worse for being exactly that: partition tables, guards at the periphery pretending not to watch, a flat institutional light in pale green and gray that makes everyone in it look slightly guilty of something, herself included. She sits down across from him and for a moment neither of them speaks, because the last time they occupied a room together, he was a boy in a courtroom being sentenced and she was a woman who had not yet decided what forgiveness would cost her. He's 41 now. His head is shaved, his eyes guarded in the specific way of a man long accustomed to not being believed. There's a tattoo on his forearm, faded, that he doesn't try to hide and doesn't explain unless asked. She remembers, from an old article, that he's spoken publicly about regretting it, though she can't recall what it says or shows, only that it belongs to a version of himself he no longer defends. He wears a plain button-down instead of prison issue, because of the work release program, and somehow that ordinary detail, a man in a button-down, waiting for her, hands folded on the table the way a person waits for a job interview, is harder for her to look at than anything else in the room. "You came," he says. "I had to see you say it. Not write it." He nods slowly, as if he expected that and respects it. "Then I'll say it. I'm not asking you to forgive me again, Mrs. Marshall. You already did that. What I did to your daughter doesn't get undone by anything I do after. I know that better than anyone alive, because I live inside the fact of it every day. I'm not doing anything with the life she doesn't get to have. I'm asking you to let me keep doing the only thing I've found that makes any of it bearable. That's a different question than the one you already answered. I know that. I need you to know I know that too." It's the first time she's heard the reasoning laid out plainly, without the careful hedges of a letter, and something in his directness, the plainness of it, no performance, no plea, reaches somewhere in her that his written words hadn't touched.
"Do you know what it did to me? To stand up in front of cameras and forgive you?"
She says, "Do you have any idea what people expected from me after that? What I expected from myself? I couldn't grieve like a normal mother for over a year, because I'd become this symbol. This story people needed. I couldn't cry in public because it might look like I regretted what I'd said. I couldn't be angry, because angry women don't get called inspirations. I built an entire second grief just to carry the first one where people could see it." "No," he says. "I don't know that. I've only ever known what it cost me to be forgiven. I never let myself think about what it cost you to give it." The silence that follows is longer than either of them means it to be. She finds she has nothing prepared for this, no statement, no measured voice, only the raw fact of sitting across from the man who ended her daughter's life and finding, against everything she thought she'd built. "I read about the boy," she says finally. "Darnell." Something shifts in his face, surprise, maybe, or the particular vulnerability of a private thing suddenly being known by the one person he least expected to know it. "That wasn't for you to see. That wasn't why I know it wasn't. That's why it mattered." She looks at her own hands on the table, the small scar on her left one, ordinary, unremarkable. "I keep trying to decide if what you're doing in there changes anything about what you did to her. It doesn't. I want to be clear with you, and with myself, that it doesn't undo a single thing. It's not supposed to undo it. Then what is it supposed to do?" He's quiet for a moment, choosing his words the way a man chooses them who has learned, the hard way, exactly how much they can cost. "It's supposed to be the only honest thing I can offer instead. I can't give Emily back a single day. I can maybe keep some other family from losing what yours lost. That's not a trade. I know it's not a trade. It's just the only direction I've got left to walk in." "That's fair," he says. And then, quieter, his guarded eyes dropping to the table between them. "I've written you 100 letters I never sent. Most of what I wanted to say to you, I decided I didn't have the right to. I don't know if that makes this better or worse, you knowing that now. There's one more thing," he says, before she can push her chair back. "You don't have to answer it here. I just need you to have heard it." He waits until she meets his eyes again.
If you say no, I'm not gonna write to you again asking why.
I want you to know that now, so it's not hanging over whatever you decide. Whatever's left of my life outside these walls, if I get one, I'll build it without needing you to have signed off on it. I just couldn't ask for it without telling you the truth about why first. That part was never optional, for me. It's the closest he's come, in 6 years of letters and this single hour face-to-face, to releasing her from the weight of his request entirely, and it undoes something in her that his asking never did. She sits back down, just for a moment, just long enough to say the only thing she has left that's true. "I don't hate you," she says. "I want you to know that too. I don't know yet if that's the same thing as what you're asking for. But it's not nothing, and I'm not going to pretend it is." She stands to leave before he finishes speaking, not out of anger, but because she can feel something in her chest close to breaking, and she has spent 6 years learning not to break in front of witnesses. The last thing she sees, walking out, is his face, not pleading, not hopeful, just steady, the way a man looks when he has already decided he can survive being told no. She doesn't answer him. She drives home in silence, radio still off, and when she gets there she sits in her car in the driveway for 40 minutes before she can make herself go inside, watching the porch light she left on that morning flicker faintly against the dark. The parole board hearing is set for the second week of April, in the same fluorescent-lit room where, 6 years ago, Denise read a statement she is no longer certain she fully believed in the moment she gave it. This time she has written nothing down. She tells Pastor James this the morning of, on the phone, and he doesn't try to talk her out of it, doesn't offer her a single word to lean on. "You'll know," is all he says. "You've known this whole time. You just haven't let yourself hear it yet." She spends the morning of the hearing at Emily's photograph before she leaves the house, not speaking to it, just looking, the way she used to look at Emily across the kitchen table on ordinary mornings that meant nothing at the time and mean everything now. She doesn't put on the cardigan. She almost reaches for it out of habit, sees it hanging by the door, and leaves it there instead, choosing a plain gray sweater she's never worn on camera, never worn to a single interview, a small private decision that no one in the hearing room will notice and that matters enormously to her anyway. Robert is there, 3 rows back, arms crossed, jaw set, the same work jacket he wore to her porch weeks ago. Pastor James sits near the front, close enough to be present, far enough that she knows, without looking at him, that he's kept his promise not to guide her. Marcus sits at a table facing the board, in his plain button-down, hands folded, guarded eyes fixed somewhere past all of them, and for one brief moment, before the proceedings begin, his gaze finds hers across the room and holds there, not asking anything now, just present, the way he was in the visiting room, waiting to find out what kind of answer 6 years of letters have finally earned him. When they call her name, she stands, and for one long moment at the podium, she says nothing at all. The room holds its breath in that particular way rooms do when everyone in it wants a different answer and no one is sure which one they're about to get. She can feel Robert's eyes on the back of her neck. She can feel Marcus not looking at her at all now, staring instead at his own folded hands, as if giving her the privacy of not being watched while she decides what to do with the rest of his life, and with what's left of her own. 6 years ago, she says, finally, I stood in a room like this one and forgave the man who killed my daughter. I meant it. I still mean it. But I have spent the years since wondering whether that forgiveness was something I gave freely, or something I gave because a room full of people needed to watch a grieving mother be merciful, and I was too broken at the time to know the difference. She looks, briefly, at Robert, whose face doesn't change, and then at Marcus, whose does, just slightly, just enough. She pauses. The room is silent enough that she can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above her, the same hum she remembers from 6 years ago, when she thought forgiveness was a door she'd walked through once and for good, rather than a room she'd have to keep choosing to stay in. Marcus asked me to stand here again. I want to be honest, in this room, about what I'm doing instead. I forgave him once, completely, 6 years ago, and I don't take that back today. What he's done with the years since, the boys he's kept off the road that led him to my daughter, that matters, and I won't pretend it doesn't move me, because it does. But I have learned, in the weeks since his letter came, that forgiveness was never a debt that grows interest. It was a single, complete thing I gave, on a single day, in a single act of will. I am still, some mornings, not entirely sure I could survive giving twice.
I do not owe compound payments on it for the rest of my life.
And I don't think any person who has ever forgiven anyone truly owes that, no matter how good the person they forgave goes on to become. She feels Robert's shoulders drop slightly behind her, though she doesn't turn to look. She feels Marcus go very still. Whether this board grants his release is a decision about public safety and rehabilitation that belongs to people with better information than I have. It is not a referendum on whether my forgiveness 6 years ago was real. It was real. And it is also, finally, allowed to be finished. I am not going to tell you what to decide about Marcus Webb. I'm only going to tell you that whatever you decide, it will not be because I stood here today and either gave him something or withheld something. That part, the part that was mine to give, I already gave, 6 years ago, and I am done being asked to give it again. She doesn't say yes. She doesn't say no. She says the one thing none of them expected her to say, and then she steps back from the podium, and before the board can ask a single follow-up question, before Robert's face can settle into whatever it's about to settle into, before Marcus can look at her with whatever is in his eyes now, she walks out of the hearing room and doesn't look back. She hears, behind her, the low murmur of the room trying to decide what it just witnessed. She doesn't stop to find out. Outside, in the parking lot, the April light is sharper than she expects after the fluorescent gray of the hearing room, and she stands beside her car for a long moment just breathing it in, feeling, for the first time in 6 years, entirely and only like herself, not a symbol, not an inspiration, not a cautionary tale for either side of the argument, just a woman who has finally said something true instead of something expected. She never learns, not that day, that the board's decision will come by letter, weeks from now, to an address she will read alone, standing up, the way she reads everything that matters. What she carries out of that room instead is something she hasn't felt in 6 years, the sense that the deciding is no longer being done to her. Emily's grave sits at the edge of a small cemetery on the outskirts of Millbrook, beneath an oak tree that was young when she was buried and isn't young anymore. Denise comes here more than she tells people, in the soft gold light of early evening, when the groundskeepers have gone home and there's no one left to watch her be whatever she actually is instead of whatever she's supposed to be. She sits down in the grass beside the headstone, Emily's necklace at her own throat today, and for the first time in longer than she can remember, she talks to her daughter honestly, not the careful, curated version of honesty she's offered at podiums and pulpits, but the unfinished, uncertain kind she's never let anyone hear, not even James. I don't know if I did the right thing, she says. Today, or 6 years ago. I keep waiting to feel certain, and I don't think certainty is coming. I think maybe it was never supposed to. The wind moves through the oak leaves above her, and somewhere past the cemetery fence a car passes on the road, and Denise sits with the quiet the way she used to sit with Emily's noise, the quick laugh, the teasing voice, the girl who believed people deserved second chances but not blindly, who would have had an opinion about all of this, sharp and unfiltered, and who never got the chance to have it. She remembers, suddenly and without warning, the last conversation they ever had, an argument, small and stupid in hindsight, about nothing that mattered, the kind of thing you forget within a week if you get the chance to have 100 more conversations after it. Denise didn't get 100 more. She got that one, unresolved, and then silence. You'd have told me exactly what you thought, Denise says, almost smiling despite the ache of it. You never let me sit with anything too long. She doesn't tell the grave that Marcus Webb is somewhere right now waiting on a letter of his own, or that Robert hasn't called since the hearing, or that Pastor James told her, quietly, afterward, that what she said in that room was the first time in 6 years he'd heard her sound entirely like herself instead of like the version of herself the story needed her to be. She doesn't need to say any of that here. What she came to say is simpler, and harder, and she says it now, into the gold light, to the daughter who will always be 22. I forgave him because I couldn't carry hating him for the rest of my life, not for him, for me. That was true then and it's still true now. But I don't owe anyone, not him, not you, not the version of me that stood on television, a repeat performance of it, forever, on command, every time it's asked for. I think that's allowed. I think even Grace gets to have an edge. I think you'd have understood that faster than I did. She sits there until the light goes from gold to gray, her hand resting on the grass over her daughter's name, and she doesn't leave with an answer to the question that has followed her for 6 years and will likely follow her for the rest of her life. She leaves instead with something quieter than an answer, the sense that she is allowed to still be deciding, that the deciding itself doesn't make her forgiveness any less real, doesn't undo the day she gave it or the years she spent living inside what it cost her. Whether Marcus Webb walks free is not this story's ending, because it was never really the question underneath it. The real question, the one Denise carries home with her that evening and the one she leaves, unanswered, for whoever hears this story next, is simpler and harder than any parole board could resolve. If forgiveness is real the moment you give it, does it have to be given again, every time it's asked for, or is it allowed to be complete? And if it's allowed to be complete, what do we actually owe the people we've already forgiven, once, with everything we had?